thank you for joining me. I appreciate the effort. Hope you're all safe and well. Not sure how this is going to go. This is our inaugural Q&A session, just to try it out and see whether you guys have any interesting questions that I can help answer for you. So I'm going to work through the questions that you guys have sent me via Instagram. They're in no particular order. I'm literally just going to hit them chronologically in the order you sent them to me. Okay, so the first one that we were asked was bottom brackets, Chris King, ceramic speed, or anything else. So that's an interesting question. They're both amazing brands for bottom brackets. I think the bottom brackets are the best thing that Ceramic Speed make, and I think if you speak to the guys at Ceramic Speed, they'd be the first to admit that, you know, if you're going to invest in ceramic bearings, wheel bearings and bottom brackets is the place to spend the money. I know everyone instantly lurches towards the big pulley-wheeled derailleur arms, but it's not actually saving you a huge amount. It's the biggest resistance really is all coming from the more quickly moving and quickly rotating bearings. So in terms of which do I prefer, Ceramic Speed or Chris King or anything else, I guess the answer to that is it depends on what bike it's for and how you're going to use it. So the Ceramic Speed bearings, I would say, are amazing as long as you maintain them. You know, if you maintain them well, that's a bottom bracket for life. But they do need regular greasing with the special ceramic grease. Chris King bottom brackets, I'm a big fan of those. I guess the only reason you might not want a Chris King is if it won't fit your bike. Rather sensibly, they don't offer any press fit bottom brackets because, as we all know, press fit's a waste of time. So where Ceramic Speed really is helpful is when you've got an odd bottom bracket. So, you know, they were one of the first people to do dub bottom brackets for things like T47 bottom bracket shells. And any of you that have kind of looked at my frames will know that I'm a big fan of the T47 bottom bracket because it allows the use of nice big bearings. You can get them outboard. You know, I'm a fan of the 86mm wide bottom bracket. I think, you know, if you're going to use an odd shell, so for instance those people with Colnagos with their sort of strange T45 bottom bracket, Ceramic Speed are, I think, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, about the only people that make a specific threaded bottom bracket for that, so that you can do away with that horrible press fit adapter thing that Colnago supply. So you know, they're kind of horses for courses. They're both great examples. If you're one of those unfortunates with a press fit bottom bracket in their frame, I would say my favourites that we use a lot of at the studio are the Wheels Industries BBs that screw together. So you've got the benefit of a threaded bottom bracket system, even if your frame isn't threaded, so you can do away with all the silly creaking. I hope that's answered the question. If you want to know more about bottom brackets, drop me a question and I will look at answering that on the next session. Okay, so one question that's just come in, I'll answer now before I lose track of it. So Mr. Piper has asked how long it takes to build a frame. So that's an interesting question. I guess physically building it, for like taking the tubes, cutting them, welding them, and then sanding them smooth, 1 to 2 days. You know, if you're working on it solidly, which doesn't happen very often, it's probably something in the region of 20 hours, start to finish, on the physical manufacture, not including paint. Paint, even if it's a single colour, is going to take 3 to 4 to 5 days, depending on atmospheric variables. The biggest bit, I think, of the building a frame is actually the bit that comes before that. It's the consultation with the client, working out what they need, designing the frame, tweaking it, making sure their fit is right. And I know that's one of the things that we do that's a little different to a lot of other frame builders, in that we do all of our own bike fitting. But that's just because that's another string to our bow here at Meteor Works and our sister company Velo Atelier. So if you want to find out any more about our bike fit side, I'll probably run one of these sessions on the Velo Atelier Instagram, which, if you're not already following that, head over there and follow that after this. And any bike fit or biomechanics questions you've got, ask me those and we'll cover those over there. I hope that answers your question, Johnny. So next one. What would be my dream project? Wow, that's a good one. To be honest, I've been so lucky in my career. I've done a lot of my dream projects. Things that I really wanted to do, I've managed to do for various different companies. So I guess there's still a few little things that need ticking off. I've got a strange hankering to build a kind of 80s inspired lugged rigid mountain bike, and try and find a set of Campag mountain bike gear to put on it. But I can't see any client ever asking me to do that. So I think that's going to be one that I probably end up doing eventually. What else? I miss the demise of old school touring frames. I know kind of Thorn still make quite a few, and there's various other companies still doing them. But I when I first got into cycling in the 80s, I was a big fan of touring, and so at the time the rally randonneur was almost the king of that. I remember the Crane brothers going over the Himalayas on a couple, and I used to love all the fine frame details, like the 2 spare spokes acting as a chain guard and things like that. So I've never really built an old school, as you call it, randonneur bike. So maybe that. So next question. What have I enjoyed about my story at Meteor Works so far? So, as you can tell, I didn't pre-read any of these questions. I just thought it'd be more interesting to be a bit more ad hoc. So, what have I enjoyed most? I would say what I enjoy most about Meteor Works, and so that's essentially my own frame building company where I'm dealing directly with the clients and building their dream bikes for them. I think what I like the most, compared to other jobs I've done, like design frames and bikes and product manage ranges for bigger companies, is that you have that immediate connection with the people you're building bikes for. And from a design perspective, there's nothing more interesting than having a different brief set every single time and having to try and do all the research and meet that brief. I was chatting to a client last night who's given me an interesting brief that I've now got to really sit down and scratch my head for a couple of days and work out how we're going to do it. But that's why I do it. It's great. As opposed to when you're just designing ranges for big companies, you don't really know whether people are going to like it or not, and that's kind of, in a lot of ways, it's kind of why the bike industry is so odd, in that it's one of the few industries where people design stuff and then try and work out how to sell it to you, rather than it being kind of brief centric, or it's the push is in the wrong way. So I hope that's answered the question. Clients, essentially, is what I'm trying to get to. I love dealing face to face with clients, and there's nothing more rewarding than the day you do the handover with them. I never thought 30 years ago, 35 years ago, whenever it was that I started building frames, that I would make so many grown men cry. But it's ace. Right, what's the next question? So, the top 3 or 5 mistakes made by frame builders. Right, okay. There's various ways I could answer this without trying to get too ranty. I would say one of the things I think a lot that I see a lot of, and I have seen a lot of over the years, and I'm not going to point any fingers at any specific frame builders. I think one of the things that I've seen is guys or girls that build frames but don't do the bit beforehand in terms of the fit side, or the bit afterwards in terms of building it up into a bike. One of the things that I think makes our frames unique is that start to finish, I'm involved in the process. So, knowing that I'm physically going to have to build that bike and look after it after it's gone to the client, I want to make sure that it's going to be easy to build, easy to maintain, isn't going to have any stupid things on it that wear cables out or kink cables or, all that sort of stuff. So I think having that start to finish, or cradle to grave, if you want to hit the buzzwords, attitude to frame building really goes a long way in terms of getting a better product. Other things, mistakes made by frame builders. Worrying too much about the paintwork and less about the design of the ergonomics. That's something I unfortunately see a lot of. But in fairness, a lot of people buy bikes based on how cool the paint job is. So, each to their own. It's not our bag. Other than that, I don't really know. I mean, frame building is in a pretty good place at the moment, I would say, in the UK and across the world, because there's never been as much interest in frame building and as many frame builders. Even if some of them come and go, it's great that people are interested in it and getting involved and working on it. I remember when I started my first job as designer at Pashley in Stratford, I think I was probably the youngest person at the time that Reynolds had ever dealt with. Frame building was kind of a dying art, or independent frame builders were few and far between. You'd got Chaz Roberts and Dave Yates and Mercier and a few other guys, Rorke and a few people like that. But I spent probably the first 10 years of my career getting told I was too young to build frames, and then weirdly, I got a bespoke now, and I'm probably the oldest man in the room. So they kind of can't win. It seems to have become a young man's game now. But that's good. It's nice that there's fresh new blood getting into it. So long may that continue. So what's the next question? Now we're likely to go on a bit about this one. Why buy steel? Very good question. So I get asked this question a lot, especially in the studio, the Velo Atelier studio. Thank you, Mr. Biggs. I appreciate the fact you think I'm still young. I think, steel, and you think about it, we've been making bikes out of steel for over 100 years. It's very highly developed, and there's no other material that we build bikes from that's had that length of development process. So, the shapes and the technology that goes into building a steel frame now, you can look at some of the, there are some seat and chainstays from Dedicia that have got about 11 or 12 material processes going on in their manufacture. That level of manipulation just hasn't really crossed over yet into other materials. Now, the other thing is, people always go, oh, steel is really heavy. Well, yeah, it might have been 100 years ago, but, I can build you a steel frame now that will pretty much be equivalent or lighter than your average £1,000 carbon frame. And I see a lot people saying, oh, well, you know, I've got to have a carbon bike. Well, that's like saying I need to have a red car. It doesn't tell you anything about the car. Carbon bikes or titanium bikes or aluminium bikes or steel bikes, they're really dependent on how good the design is, how well the person designing it understands the material, and also what the bike's been built for. You know, if you want something super stiff or super comfortable, then you can pretty much do that in every material, as long as that's what you're building it for. Now, certain materials have inherent properties. You know, people always talk about the fact that titanium is quite comfortable because it's springy. Well, yeah, you can make springs out of titanium. You can make springs out of steel. Pretty difficult to build a spring out of aluminium. So, comfortable aluminium really has to come down to really clever geometry and ergonomics, and also your finishing kit. You know, making sure you've only got a 27.2 seat pin in there and that sort of thing. When aluminium was first really kind of growing as a material in the mid to late 80s, you know, there was lots of buzz around aluminium and all the various things like specialised MMC and that sort of stuff. That, you know, it was all about stiffness, which is great, unless you're like me and you've got a bit of a knackered back, and stiffness is not fun. You end up having to go to bigger wheels, bigger tyres, and all of that. Which is, you know, if you look at the way the market has gone today, we've moved towards, due to the fact that we've now got disc brakes and tubeless, we're able to start having bigger tyres to counteract the fact that most cheap carbon frames are overbuilt so they don't break, and hence pretty horribly stiff. I think when people ask me why steel, the best thing I can say are that someone's just mentioned graphene. I'll get on to that. The best thing I can say is you know, when I've had people, you know, and a lot of new cyclists, people that have only been cycling for 5-6 years, they may have never had a bike that isn't carbon. You get them off their £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 carbon bike, stick them on a nice steel bike and get them to run up and down the road, and I've never ever had someone come back that hasn't got a huge grin on their face. And the kind of words that always come out are things like lively, you know, the frame feels alive. And I think it's silly things like, you know, you get out of the saddle and pedal, a steel bike kind of tends to go, and then when you sit back down, it's still comfortable. And, you know, there are lots of options available to people that build steel frames. And if you know what you're doing and you choose your tubes carefully, dependent upon who's going to be riding it and what they're going to be riding it for, you know, you can pretty much tailor in any quality you want because of what's available to us now. So, you know, I can't say that about any other material. And, you know, I say this having designed carbon frames, and I've never built an aluminium frame because I kind of don't like it. I think that just comes from, you know, I grew up in an era when it was all about very lightweight Klein attitudes and things like that, and too many times when I was at things like Malvern Classics or you know, Portsmouth and stuff, there'd be too many kind of unicycles coming back down the hill with people carrying the back end of their bike, and so I'm not a fan of aluminium. But you know, I think new materials that are coming through now are really exciting. I think some of the work that the guys like Bastion are doing with 3D printed titanium is amazing, and you know, any of those who've been to the studio and had a look at the cut throughs that we have there of their lugs will I think freely admit it's a pretty exciting time. So graphene in bikes, no one's proven it does anything yet. You know, it's a good thermal conductor, an electrical conductor. What it actually does in bikes, I'm yet to see any proper proof that it does anything other than give you something else to market. Does that answer the question? Maybe. Right, so next question was, what would you suggest for people wanting to build their own frame? Well, that is a good question. Thank you, Mr. Morton, for that one. Well, in fact, no, I think that was Charlie Ward. So thank you for that. Building your own frame. It's a funny one. I mean, unless you've got all the kit, I would always recommend you just go to one of the reputable schools. So here in the UK, we've got various ones. There's Downland Cycles, there's the Bicycle Academy, all very good, run good courses, will teach you, if you go to the Bicycle Academy, for instance. I will definitely answer your question, Jamie. I'm liking your style. So there are good. There are really good schools out there, and if you don't have the kit, go to one of them. You haven't got to worry about your insurance, gas bottles, all of that stuff. If you really want to do it yourself and you don't want to go to a school, then it is possible to build a frame literally in your garage with nothing more than a map gas kit and some files. Okay, as long as you've got the time and the patience, you can do it. And there's a couple of proper old school books that you can probably find online, like Patrax and stuff like that, that show you how to do some of that stuff. But you never know. I'm not a great educator. I haven't got the patience for it, but I know people that are. So you never know. Watch your space. Right. So before I forget it, Mr. Mitchell's question: whatever happened to scandium and magnesium, like on the old Kirk Revolution frames? Great question. So in terms of things like scandium, which is basically a type of aluminium, it's a composite aluminium. It sits in that kind of school of metal matrix composite aluminiums. So it's aluminiums that's had other stuff put into it, like molecules of ceramic, typically, and there were other things tried. It kind of went out of fashion because it was quite expensive to produce the tubing. The tubing was so, there was very little elasticity in the tubing, so it was really hard to manipulate. So you really only had round tubing to work with. And it was pretty difficult to even put butts into it and stuff like that. That's when carbon was beginning to come into the picture, and I think most of the manufacturers realised, a bit like surfboard manufacturing, it's much easier to just knock up a mould and pop them out than have someone handcraft something and weld it and linish it and all that sort of thing. So it was purely economics, I think, that kind of was the death of things like scandium and MMCs. Which is a shame, because there was some really interesting work being done in steel MMCs, there was a material called AirMet, and I've looked over the years to see what happened to it, and it's disappeared off the face of the earth. But I remember playing with a little bit of that when I was in America, and that had some serious mechanical properties that were pretty interesting. In terms of magnesium, in theory, brilliant material to work with, and you can still buy a lot of magnesium components in terms of fork legs, pedals, that sort of thing. As I say, in theory, it's a great material because it's abundant. 1 cubic meter of seawater has enough magnesium in it to produce one of those Kirk frames. I seem to remember it's something like that. But yeah, it's an abundant material. The problem is it's a bugger to manipulate and actually get into a malleable state. I think the bigger issue with magnesium is paint doesn't like sticking to it. It oxidizes really quickly. As most of you've got metal pencil sharpeners will know, they go grey very quickly. They don't stay shiny very long because they're typically magnesium. So it's a funny one. It also really suffered from, I mean, any of you that have ever ridden one of those Kirk frames, there wasn't a hell of a lot of stiffness there. I mean, it didn't help that they were an elevated chainstay design, which were always a bit floppy. But yeah, it's a shame. It's a good material. It'd be good for people to get interested in other materials again. I think at the moment most of the manufacturers are really just ploughing down the carbon route because it's quick to build them, mass produce, and anything that pops out of a mould's always easy. So and if I see one, I'll point it in your direction, Jamie. Okay, so I've been asked, are there any regulations to making your own bikes? And when choosing a frame builder, what should we be looking for? Is a very good question. So in theory, there isn't really any regulation. Anyone can set themselves up and be a frame builder. You really want to be, if they're not if they're not a frame builder that's well known, and if they're new, and there's nothing wrong with new frame builders, before anyone gets upset, there are some guys out there that haven't built many frames but are churning out really beautiful stuff that I would trust. But I think the first thing you've got to ask is, have you got insurance? Anyone producing a product in the UK and selling it really should be having product and public liability insurance. And also, various frame builders choose to submit frames to British standards or ISO to have them stress tested. But when you're looking at custom frames, it's quite difficult because obviously it's a one-off. Essentially, unless you're one of those frame builders that basically builds the same frame but just changes the size to suit you, which I would kind of call tailored frames. Yes, you could send one of those, have it tested, and then you really are in the realm of, like any mass-produced product. In theory, the one that's been tested is a good sample of what's being made. I think mostly though, that there are, because it's frames typically, it doesn't have to meet the standard kind of British standards regulations. Not that they really mean a lot anyway. They're a bit pointless. They're the regulations that mean that even if you're buying like a 12 grand super bike in a shop, that's why you'll always see it with reflectors and a bell. It's a coverall regulation that doesn't really apply in a usable way to most products that are over a grand. So in terms of what you should be looking for, good reputation, really, I guess. A bit of longevity, good reputation, and the key when you're buying a custom frame is you're not just buying a product. Part of what you're doing is getting an experience with the builder. So it's a relationship. And that's why, I mean, over the years I've got kind of a range of clients now that just come back, and I'm building their second, third, fourth bikes, and there's a few that totally don't need a new bike, but they enjoy the experience. And that's great because there's a definite shorthand that builds up over the years of working with someone. So I don't know, I've gone off on a tangent. I hope that's answered your question. Okay, so painting frames. What's the must-have equipment and do's and don'ts? Okay, so painting frames. So if you want to paint your own frame, it is doable. There's some good products out there to allow you to do it. I would say the key things to bear in mind are preparation. You kind of almost can't do enough preparation. And it's the one mistake I think I see most amateur like spray jobs, you can kind of still see lines where old graphics haven't been sanded all the way back. I mean, I think basically, if in doubt, take it back to the bare material. If it's a carbon frame, be really careful. Don't sort of steam in there with a power sander. You're really looking at kind of using 350 grit sandpaper and just taking your time and taking it back until you get to the bare metal or the bare carbon. If it's an aluminium frame, I kind of wouldn't do it. Aluminium doesn't like paint, so if you're going to paint an aluminium frame and you want to do it yourself, probably don't take it all the way back to the metal. Take it down to the primer, because that'll be a special etch primer that is going to be difficult as an amateur for you to get as an aerosol. And I guess that's an easy segue really into what I would suggest. If you can do it yourself, I wouldn't worry about spray guns, because you're not going to have the sort of extraction required to cope with the higher pressures of a spray gun. If you have, great, which means you don't need me to tell you what to do. But yeah, there are some really good aerosol brands on the market now. Go for a 2K primer. So that's a primer that's got two stages to it. So it's an epoxy. Typically there's a little knob on the bottom or a plunger that you press in that releases the catalyst into the main. Give it a good shake to mix it up, and then you've got a certain amount of time in which to use it. Good primer, let it go off properly, let all the solvents come out of it. Wet sand that back, make it super smooth. Then do your base coats and your graphics and all that good stuff. If you're doing multiple colours and you're going to be doing multiple bits of masking, maybe after each base coat, put a light coat of single K or like 1K or single use clear coat or lacquer. And once you've finished your design, you want to find yourself an aerosol of 2K clear coat, which again it has a catalyst that you plunge into it or turn a little knob. That will then go off much harder than a normal clear coat, and once it's gone off, and give it a good amount of time to go off and all the solvents to disappear, once that's gone off, and then that's really a matter of, to get the perfect finish, just wet and drying. So start at say 800, wet sand that all over, go up 1000, 1200, 2500, 3000 if you can get it, and then that's when you start cutting with polishing compounds. So a lot of people that like the idea of spraying bikes, they think it's spraying bikes. I would say in terms of doing a custom paint job on a bike, the actual spraying bit takes maybe 15 minutes. But it's the preparation beforehand, all the flattening and rubbing down in between, and then the final polishing can take, literally the final polishing on a frame can take a couple of days. So it's know what you're getting into before you start doing it. If you want to do a good job and you've got the time, which at the moment quite a lot of us have, that's what to do. So that's the end of the questions that I've been sent. If any of you have anything else you'd like me to discuss, pop it down there now. In fact, here we go. So, have you had to adapt at all since road discs have developed? Yes, I guess is the honest answer. What road disc has done is it's freed up the design process, because all of a sudden I haven't got to try and fit everything inside a brake caliper. So what I do with chain stays and seat stays and clearances and all of that stuff now is totally open, and you're able to do anything, and it's given the opportunity of all of a sudden not having to worry about wheel size even. I played around just before Christmas with multiple wheel size combinations on bikes to see what it did and all that sort of thing. So I think that and I think that will come actually, especially as always. One of the things of not being able to use multiple wheel sizes on the same bike always used to be, I'd have to carry 2 different inner tubes. Well, now we're tubeless, that's irrelevant. So, I remember, I think it was Cannondale did some dual wheel size downhill bikes, which were amazing. Because, basically each wheel was designed for the task it was doing. So one is driving and braking and one is steering, and so they don't necessarily want to be the same size. So I think especially as you start looking at smaller bikes where clearances are more of an issue, especially in the back wheel, I can see there being a time when we start doing like 650B or 650C, which I think is a much underutilized wheel size, and 700C fronts, and that sort of thing. And then also on the other end, for really big bikes, well, why do we stick to 700C? Why not go a bit bigger? They're available, not easily, but So I think that's the thing with disc brakes, is the braking bit of it is sort of irrelevant. We're still braking with the same bit of contact patch on the floor, essentially. How we're maximising the friction on that is obviously changed from the outside of the rim to the middle of the hub, but that's kind of irrelevant. It's the freedom of design that it's now opened up, and I think we've only really started to see the tip of the iceberg on that. Okay, so Jamie, you would like to know what my dream project is. So we touched on this right at the very start. I think it was one of the first questions. I would love to build I would love to build a lugged 80s style mountain bike, but with modern geometry, and kind of introduce some of those old things that I used to love about mountain bikes. I live in Warwickshire. I don't need a full suspension bike, and actually, that's where kind of gravel bikes have become such a big part of all our lives, in that, well, we don't have Welsh trails here, so why try and make them boring by flattening everything out? I want, a 1.5 tyre and an interesting ride. So it's not just about going quick. I hope that answers your question. Okay, Johnny, is there still a place for rim brakes? Yeah, I guess. I'm about to build myself a new road bike, and I've been really scratching my head as to whether to go disc or rim. I have both currently. I think my main, in fairness, my main concern is I've got a really nice pair of wheels I built with Royce hubs, and I don't want to lose those, which would be my reason for going rim brake. But I guess at the moment, if you want to go super light, you can still build it lighter than a. You can still build it lighter than a disc brake bike. I think next year we're likely to see. There's a few prototypes of stuff I've been shown that I think will take disc brakes much lighter, but I still like it. If you're still running 25s or 28s, the new Campy and the new Dura-Ace rim brake calipers will take a 28. If you just want simplicity and not have to worry about bleeding and that sort of thing, why not? I'm not a snob about that sort of stuff at all. So, are there any good resources for a newbie builder wanting to learn more about the subtleties of geometry? Good question. Honestly, none that spring to mind. Most of the stuff that I know about geometry has come through experience and my degree in industrial design ergonomics. But I think the experience bit actually is the more important bit. Now, there are a couple of good videos online. If you Google frame geometry on YouTube, there's one or two good ones. There's one that a lady has done, and she draws it all out. It's like an animated thing. That's quite good. There's some interesting stuff there. I think what I would recommend though is there's no real substitute for trying stuff out. Do stuff. Go through some stuff. Take your bike and ride it with multiple different stems on and see what difference that makes to the handling and the geometry and all that sort of stuff. But I think you're right. Keep making and riding. That's really the best way to go. Cool. Okay, guys. Listen, I've rattled on for 40 minutes. I hope you've all found that interesting and it's taken you away from all the weird and wonderful things that are going on outside the window at the moment. So if you think there's value in us doing another one, drop us a message. If you've got any questions or you know someone that might have a question, get them to drop us the line so that we can answer them. And we'll maybe throw another one of these up in a week or so. Okay? Stay safe, guys. Keep riding. Be responsible. And I will look forward to speaking to you all soon.